friends, a very warm welcome to all of you. In this session, I am going to start the new module, that is module 10, titled Organizational Justice, Ethics and Corporate Social Responsibility. Again, a very important perspective when we are talking about organizational behavior, because whenever we are talking about behavior, it is not only about responding to any situation, can be extended basically in form of right patterns of behavior. This rightness of pattern of behavior can be extended in form of what we perceive to be right and what we perform has to be right. This module is all about the right pattern of behavior in form of justice, that is right and wrong, fair and unfair. It is about ethics, that is morally or immorally or correct or incorrect action or decision taken by an employee or the organization, and corporate social responsibility, that to what extent the organization is returning to the society based on their own organizational performance. This is the bottom line of this module. We will go into deep details one by one. So, with this continuation, I will first talk about that what is organizational justice. When we talk about justice, it is about fairness and unfairness. That is very much relatable, and we understand the literal meaning of this term, but how it is implicated in organizations, that is a different discussion that we will continue in this session only. So, justice refers to the idea that an action or decision is morally right which may be defined according to ethics, equity, fairness or law. That means any governing body which states that any action or decision is right or wrong defines justice, and if it is not defined in a morally correct manner, then it is referred to as injustice. Fairness is of central interest to organizations because the implication of perception of injustice can impact job attitudes and behaviors at work. This is very important to understand right now, that whenever any injustice is perceived at work in terms of pay, in terms of salary, in terms of bonus, in terms of rewards, in terms of recognition, in terms of resources or allocation of resources, if it is not equal, if it is not fair, then it is perceived as injustice, and it has a long term impact on the attitudes and behavior of people at work, because when it leads to dissatisfaction, it leads to decreased morale, and definitely it negatively impacts the effectiveness of the organization. So, Greenberg in the year 1987 introduced the concept of organizational justice and defined it as the extent to which an organization treats people fairly. Now, this treatment is a very broad term. It is about fairness or justice in form of salary, in form of promotion, in form of bonus, in form of recognition and rewards. It can be about appraisals as well, that to what extent an individual employee's performance has been appraised, has been evaluated in a very justified manner. So, organizational justice includes fairness related to outcomes, procedures and interpersonal interaction. Interpersonal interaction, again, this is beyond organizational factors, which states that to what extent employees are being treated with respect, be it any subordinate or any superior, superordinate. Everybody has the right to get respect in terms of interaction and as a presence in their organization. Thus, the concept of organizational justice concerns how an employee judges the behavior of the organization and the employer's resulting attitude and behavior. So, any of the factor that we have discussed in the above definition about the organizational process, pay, salary structure, appraisal, recognition or interaction, if every aspect is being justified or is being perceived as fair by the employees, then the organization is judged as an justified organization or a fair organization, and it has a positive impact on the employees who are working with that organization. So, let us come to the formal definition of organizational justice, and it is a study of perception of fairness in organization. For example, employees' perception of salary concerning the efforts they put in, their perception of treatment at work including dignity and respect they receive, their perceptions regarding the fairness of performance evaluation, etc. As we discussed just now in the previous slide, that organizational justice pertains to fairness in form of salary, in form of promotions, in form of bonuses, and all these factors are very much related to the amount of effort that an employee puts in and the amount of outcome that is being perceived, that has to be balanced in form of justice or in form of rewards or in form of promotion. Then only that input investment of an employee and which leads to an outcome will maintain a balance in the input and output of the employee. So, this is organizational justice, and this is extended to interpersonal relationship as well, that to what extent they are being treated with dignity and respect at work. Therefore, justice in organizations include issues related to perceptions of fair pay, equal opportunities for promotion, allocation of resources and personnel selection procedure. That means fairness is not only limited to salary, pay and promotions or bonuses, it has a wider application in terms of selection of personnel, that every employee with equal qualification has the right to apply and be selected for that organization. It is about allocation of resources, that whatever the resources the organization has, they will distribute it equally among employees in order to maintain the performance and effectiveness of the organization, and definitely about pay and equal opportunities. It is about being organizations more inclusive in nature, that every member of the organization has the right to participate in the organizational activities. But how this term has evolved? It has its certain basic roots. So, the roots of organizational justice lies in the Adams equity theory. So, the idea of organizational justice stems from equity theory proposed by Adam in the year 1963, which posits that judgments of equity and equity are derived from comparisons between oneself and others based on inputs and outcomes. Two employees who have invested lot of time, energy, knowledge and efforts in a particular task, and how that in efforts are being rewarded in form of outputs, that is pay and recognition, that maintains equity. And if any employee who compares his inputs and outcomes with that of the other employee, and if there is some kind of difference or inequity in the recognition or rewards, then it leads to perception of justice, that an employee who has invested same amount of time, energy and knowledge in the task has not received enough recognition, but other employee for the same task has received more recognition than him, then it leads to perception of injustice. But yes, if definitely two employees have received equal amount of recognition, then it leads to fairness or perception of fairness at work. So, whenever we are talking about organizational justice, it is more about equity and inequity. If inputs are equal to outputs, then it maintains equity, and if it is not, then definitely it leads to unfairness or injustice or inequity. So, this is about organizational justice, which stems from Adams equity theory. So, when we are talking about organizational justice, then there are two forms of outcomes that are being perceived at work. It is not only about attitudes about an employee, but actually there are two forms of outcomes that are being perceived at work. The first is outcome favorability and the other is outcome justice. So, outcome favorability is the extent to which we perceive that the distribution of outcomes are fair. These outcomes may be pay, benefits, promotions, scholarships, subsidies and other tangible outcomes, but they may also refer to less tangible outcomes such as praise and other forms of social recognition. So, that means that whenever any employee who has given much enough efforts, knowledge and time to any particular task, then the outcome that he has perceived is favorable in respect to his inputs. That leads to favorable outcome. That is favorable outcome in the perception of that employee, that the amount of input that has been given to the task is very much in equity with the outcome. So, same amount of input is equal to same amount of output, that leads to favorable outcome. So, this is another perception of outcome of organizational justice. If we talk about outcome of justice, then it can be that increased morale, increased motivation, decreased turnover intentions and increased positive environment or climate. But yes, outcome also has its own two forms, the favorability and justice. Next is outcome justice. It is about based on moral propriety, that the rules of correct moral and social behavior. It is about that how the outcomes have been decided based on moral propriety, that is standards which states that what is right and wrong. If any employee who has invested in or has given input in terms of time, efforts, knowledge and skills, then whatever the justice has been received by the employee, it is completely based on equity or laws of equity. That means correct procedures or standards of justice has been adopted in order to provide justice to an individual's performance. So, this includes individuals' reactions to actions and decisions made by the organizations every day. An individual's perception of these decisions as fair or unfair can influence the individual's subsequent attitudes and behaviors, and perceptions of justice influence organizational outcomes such as motivation and job satisfaction. So, whatever decision the organization has made, that should reflect justice, that should reflect morality, that these are the standards of conduct that has been maintained in order to take any particular decision or action. So, that intention has to be reflected, and accordingly employees will also give reaction to those actions and decisions. If the decision is morally correct, then definitely it leads to outcome justice. The outcome justice is that employees are perceiving that decision as justified or fair. If not, for example, any policy that has been formulated while ignoring the moral standards of the organization, then employees will perceive that outcome of that decision to be unfair or unjust. So, this is about outcome favorability and outcome justice. Now, here when we talk about outcome justice, again it is about perception, the message the employees receive from the higher authorities. It is about that how it is going to impact the attitudes. If the decision is morally correct, then it is going to have a positive impact on the attitude of employees. If not, then the impact is going to be negative, and maybe employees will engage in negative patterns of behavior where they can be at back foot, they can withdraw, they can also sometimes feel demotivated or demoralized where the decision has been taken against their own wishes and will. This is how two outcomes of justice are being identified, that is outcome justice and outcome favorability. So, in both the sense, it is always perception of justice that whenever the outcome is fair, it is about perception that the outcome is fair. If any decision has been taken, then it is about the outcome justice that the decision has been taken in favor of the employees and the standards are morally correct. Now, coming further, since justice is a multifaceted concept, OB scientists have recognized three forms of organizational justice. If we have talked about two forms of outcomes when we perceive organizational justice, that is outcome favorability and outcome justice, then in expansion to organizational justice, there are three forms of organizational justice. The first is procedural justice, distributive justice and interactional justice, where interactional justice is further divided into two forms, interpersonal and informational justice. Let us talk about these in detail. Distributive justice. Distributive justice is conceptualized as a fairness associated with decision outcomes and the distribution of resources, that any decision that has been taken, it is applicable to all, not only to a specific category of people, or any decision that has been taken has been formulated for the benefit of the workforce, not only for specific group of people. And more importantly, when we talk about distributive justice, it is about distribution of resources, that whatever resources any organization has, they are being distributed equally among all the employees in order to give equal platform to enhance their performance, leading to effectiveness. So, this form of justice focuses on people's beliefs that they have received fair amount of value for work related outcomes, for example, pay or recognition. So, it should not be that one employee has received more outcome in form of increased pay or recognition and the other employee was deprived. It is about equality at every level. So, people are concerned with a fair share of resources on the job. So, it should not be that one employee has got more resources in order to perform, and whereas the other employee has not received any resource and failed to perform appropriately. So, this is about distributive justice. The other is procedural justice. Procedural justice is defined as the fairness of the process that lead to outcomes. So, whatever the process has been formulated, the policies, the procedures and leading to positive outcomes, that is procedural justice. It is the appropriateness of the allocation of the process. Now, here it is very important to note down that it is the appropriateness of the allocation process. It is about how a procedure has been followed in order to perform any job. So, that procedure is same for every employee. This involves considering how much of various outcomes an individual receives and the process by which those outcomes are determined. It is about, for example, performance appraisals, that every employee is performing their job with their utmost efforts, and in the end of the year every employee's performance is being appraised based on a common platform or common appraisal basis. It should not be that one employee has been appraised with a different procedure and the other employee has been appraised based on a different procedure. So, this leads to injustice or unfairness, but definitely if appraisals are being performed based on a single system or process, this leads to perception of fairness. So, it is about appraisals, it is about formulation of policies and procedures. So, workers considering such rating fair to the extent that specific procedures were followed. It includes 6 main points. So, whenever we are talking about procedural justice, it is about some standards or elements that are being maintained in order to maintain that justice, perception of procedural justice at work. And what are those elements? These are consistency, lack of bias, accuracy, representation of all concerned, correction and ethics. So, if we talk about these 6 main points as consistency, that means a set of procedure is being followed in a very consistent manner, that it is applicable to all. This is consistency. There is no change in the procedure of performance appraisals, there is no change in the procedure of recognizing an employee's performance. Lack of bias, that procedure is applicable to all and there is no other alternative to that procedure which will favor to any specific group. So, it is equal for all. So, there is no chance of bias. Accuracy, that same accuracy level is maintained at every level whenever an individual's performance is being measured. Representation of all concerned, this identifies in terms of formulating policies and procedures, that every policy and procedure is considering all the concerns of the employees at every level and it is not favoring only to one category of employees. Correction and ethics. So, any policy and procedure that has been formulated or existing policy and procedures can be corrected so that every employee's concern is being considered and it is equal for everybody. And the last is ethics in terms of right and wrong, that any policy and procedure system that has been floated in any organization, it is completely based on the concept of right and wrong. It is that what should be done and what should not be done in order to maintain equity at all levels. So, this is how procedural justice is being perceived and being implemented at workplaces. But most importantly to mention that whenever we are talking about justice, there are chances when there are people within organizations who tend to indulge in some malpractices which sometimes also lead to perception of injustice at work. And the other is interactional justice. It is the degree to which the people are affected by the treatment employees receive regarding dignity and respect, and interactional justice comprises 2 components, that is interpersonal and informational. It is about the social interaction that people maintain at workplaces and those social interactions are being formed or established based on respect and dignity, that every employee has equal right to receive the respect from every other employee irrespective of the hierarchy, irrespective of the status, irrespective of the position. Further, interactional justice is divided into 2 forms of justice, interpersonal and informational justice. Interpersonal justice refers to perceptions of respect and propriety in one's treatment, that is typically authority figures. Now, here the specific term that has been used is propriety in one's treatment, that is every employee has equal right to receive that dignity and respect from the other employee irrespective of their designation or status or rank in the organization, be it higher authority, superordinates or subordinates. Everybody has to treat co-workers or the employees of the organization in a very respectful manner. And the other is informational justice. It is about the adequacy of the explanations and information transferred in terms of timeliness, specificity and truthfulness. It is about the correct information that is being transferred to the other employees of the organization in a very timely and specific manner. Specific manner means that the information and the language that has been used is not ambiguous, it is straightforward, it is clear and it is understandable to every employee. So, the more the language is clear, the more it reflects the organization's intention that the clear information has been provided to the employees of that organization. So, a fundamental explanation of this phenomenon is that informational justice prompts feelings of being valued by others in organizations. The more the information is shared on a very regular basis in a very timely manner, it gives an impression to the employees that the organization, that especially the higher authorities, consider their employees as a valuable asset of the organization. If such kind of thinking is not there in any organization, then definitely employees tend to perceive that the organization is just favoring small group of employees who have all the information while ignoring the other employees. So, whenever group of people perceive this kind of feeling, this is also known as the group value explanation of organizational justice, because it gives them a prompt feeling of being valued by others in the organization. It refers to the idea that people believe that they are essential part of the organization when the organization officially takes time to explain thoroughly to them the rationale behind a decision. So, the more people tend to receive timely information, the more clarity employees receive that why any particular decision has been taken. This is about interactional justice in form of informational and interpersonal justice. So, what are the factors that lead to justice perceptions? It is not that it is a very objective term that it can be objectified in any organization. There are certain psychological factors that work behind this phenomenon, that how justice is being perceived. So, employee participation, communication and justice climate, these are the three major antecedents to justice perceptions. If we tend to experience employee participation, communication and justice climate, then it leads to perception of justice at workplace. So, if we talk about employee participation, it is the extent to which employees feel that they are involved in decision making process and other organizational procedures. It is not that only the higher authority is just taking the decisions and decision is being shared by the other members of the group or organization. It is that every member, irrespective of their organization, rank, status, position, they are being encouraged to participate in decision making procedures. That means every employee has a increased decision making latitude, and the opportunity to participate in decision making improves an individual's perception of procedural justice and interpersonal justice. So, this is how that encouragement to employee participation leads to perception of justice at work. The other is communication. Communication in the form of sharing information and voicing one's own opinion has been shown to be related to interpersonal and informational perceptions. It is so obvious that more the employees are free to express their opinions, voice their opinions and share their information, the more they perceive perceptions of justice. Even the quality of communication by an organization improves justice perception by improving employee perceptions of manager trustworthiness and also by reducing feelings of uncertainty. The more the information is flowing in the organization, the more we can see that there is certainty in the environment, because every employee is aware of the surroundings, and most importantly employees develop trust for their organization and for the higher authorities, because that maintains proximity between the higher authorities and the subordinates. So, this creates trust among members that leads to improved communication and further justice perceptions. Further, providing accurate, timely and useful information fosters justice perceptions to be positive. Third is justice climate. Employees working within a team may share their perception with one another, which can lead to a shared interpretation of the fairness of events. Such perceptions of justice form what is called justice climate. So, whenever employees are sharing their experiences, their perceptions with one another, there is a kind of interpretation of the environment that is already maintained in that organization. So, whenever the more perceptions, positive perceptions are being shared with the other members of the organization, it creates a climate of justice within organizations, and this leads to perception of justice at workplace. So, the point is that when we are talking about justice climate, it is about sharing their interpretation of the fairness of decisions and events that has taken place. So, any decision that has been taken which is justified, that means outcome justice, outcome favorability, then ultimately it is being supported by the other members of the organization. That decision is being shared by the other members of the organization, and then it creates a sense of safety, sense of certainty and sense of trustworthiness, which creates a climate of justice. So, this is how these factors, employee participation, communication and justice climate, becomes antecedent to perception of justice at workplace. And the other is outcomes of justice perceptions. What are the outcomes of justice perceptions? The first important outcome is trust, that more informational justice is there, more procedural justice and distributive justice is perceived, the more members tend to maintain trust on their co-workers. There is increased job satisfaction and commitment, because when employees receive fair pay, salary, promotions, appraisals, they become more satisfied with their job and they are highly committed to that organization. They have more affiliation with that organization. Their increased organizational citizenship behaviors, that is about discriminatory behaviors, that employees tend to contribute more to the organization even when they know that they are not being rewarded or recognized for their extra work that they offer to the organizations, but still they have that urge or desire to engage in citizenship behaviors in order to help the organization and co-workers. Reduced counterproductive work behaviors, the more justice is perceived, the more an employee tends to withdraw to perform any antisocial behavior at workplace that can harm the property or reputation of the organization. There is reduced absenteeism and withdrawal, the more the person prefers to be at workplace rather than avoiding that workplace. There is reduced emotional exhaustion. For instance, when informational or interactional injustice is perceived, then it leads to emotional exhaustion. But yes, the more dignity and respect an employee receives at work, there is reduced level of emotional exhaustion, there is improved health of the employee, physical and mental health. There is reduced turnover in tension, that means employees have more desire to continue to be part of the organization than leaving the organization, and there is more conflict management. That means members tend to engage and create less conflicting situations rather than cooperate and maintain the interest of the organization and the co-workers. So, these are the outcomes of justice perceptions. So, that is all for this session. I will continue to discuss more on this topic in the next class. Thank you so much.